So this is lab histology, the lab part of it. And it's kind of the same. But on my exam, on my practical, it's mostly identifying the tissue types, specific tissue types. So this is where we're going to live now. So we know tissues, right? We know tissues. There's 4 tissue types. Anybody remember the 4 tissue types? I always say epithelial first, because that's probably the way we'll do it. And this is very avascular tissue. It doesn't get good blood supply. So it relies on all that movement through the membrane that we went crazy talking about the last 2 times. I had to drive that home, right? Epithelial tissue lines and covers things all the time. And connective tissue, this is a little more complicated. But remember this. Connective tissue by definition means cells in a matrix. So things like ligaments and tendons. Ligaments connect bone to bone. Tendons connect muscle to bone. And fascia, this crazy word, fascia connects muscle to muscle, basically, packages muscle. But connective tissue could be blood. Blood is a connective tissue, the cells and liquid matrix, which we'll look at later. Bone is a connective tissue. Osteocytes and osteoblasts, you're going to learn all about that, all the different types of cells, the next big thing after integument. Adipose is also connective tissue. And cartilage is connective tissue. I can go on and on. It's probably the hardest one. So we'll spend a little time there in a few minutes. And then you have muscle tissue. So please make sure you can identify the 3 different types of muscle tissue on histology. Histology means like looking at under a microscope, which unfortunately we're not doing right this minute. Next week, I'm going to record. I'm going to bring a webcam and we'll walk around and see if we could get creative in showing you what we see in the microscopes, if it doesn't snow. So the 3 muscle types are skeletal muscle, smooth, also known as visceral muscle, and then you have your cardiac muscle, which is heart muscle. The only one of those 3 that's voluntary, which means you can use your brain to make it contract, is skeletal muscle. And then you have another one we're going to be talking a lot about, nervous tissue. So that's your brain, your spinal cord, and all the nerves and receptors for somatic senses like touch, pain, and special senses like vision, olfaction, which is smell, taste, which is gustation, and then hearing, audition, and balance, which is vestibular. So we're really going to go into that at the end of the semester. But what I say, do you remember what I said about the membranes, these 2 muscle membranes? Come on, stay with me. Let's stay awake for a couple hours here. What's so special about the muscle and nervous tissue membranes, like the myocyte and the neuron? It's electrical, right? It's electrical, and this is where the membrane is very excitable. And there's a lot of blood supply. I talked about mitochondria. We talked about those organelles, Anthony, Valerie, whatever your name is, right? Very vascular. This is very vascular, a lot of blood supply. And epithelial tissue is non-vascular, we say avascular. So that's an overview, and you're going to get this again in lecture. So hopefully that'll happen right before you take the lab, and we can put it all together and make a nice, straightforward exam. So here's a basic look at some epithelial tissue. We're going to go through each one, but there's a thing on the bottom of all epithelial tissue. This is the first thing I'm going to talk about. You see this membrane, it's actually connective tissue. It's a basement membrane. So we're looking at a side view, a lateral view, right? You should know your views now. And that goes right through there. So all of these cells are actually on the basement membrane. It doesn't look like it, and you're going to see what this tissue is later. It's got this really long name. This is definitely a question on a practical, what this tissue type is. And the answer is pseudostratified columnar epithelium. Don't get scared. We're going to go through each one. And you can see the nuclei. It's the darkest staining thing in the cell. And then the outside here is the cytoplasm, the lighter staining areas. So cilia is not always on the surface of cells, but it's hair-like processes that are for movement. Movement, I mentioned this yesterday, right? And moving things through like mucus along here. So this is the lumen up here of a structure like the trachea, airway, respiratory system. So the lumen is where the air is, but there's also mucus. So guess who produces the mucus? The goblet cells. Remember the word goblet cell. Sorry, I need to erase that. Goblet cells produce and secrete the mucus. So mucus is usually flowing inside a tube, like a digestive tube or a respiratory tube or a reproductive tube. So gobbing up the mucus, and it looks like this. So it's all that mucin is it's kind of a protein, like a lipoprotein that's built within these cells. So this is I'm jumping ahead here, but you know what? You might as well see what I'm going to ask, and that's it. If I have to go through this, I would get a headache. We told you all of this, subatomic particles, this whole thing. Memorize this, because this is a question in ordering on the lecture exam. Listen to like Anthony Valerie. She said she listened to the recordings and she did the quiz, and this is one of the quiz questions. It's going to be one of the exam questions. So I'll give you hints as I go on. So now this is epithelia, right? It's like a plural for the tissue type. And again, this is probably the most classic tissue because you could see the nucleus or nuclei, you could see the cytoplasm, and every epithelial cell in the epithelial tissue has a basement membrane. You don't have to know the two layers, but and it's called basal surface, but I like basement membrane better. Okay, because it's two layers, but you only have to know you only have to know the one name, basement membrane. So notice there's one cell line or a group of cells that are attached to the basement membrane on the bottom. Then they could stack up on each other. So simple means just one layer attached to the basement membrane. Stratified means it's multiple layers above that first layer. Yeah? So stratified is layered, and you're looking at it from the side. Apical surface is the top, basement membrane on the bottom, or basal surface is on the bottom. Sometimes the apical surface tells you what shape it is, but right now we're just talking about simple versus stratified. And you can only see that from the lateral view. Now here's the shapes. So squamous, probably my favorite. Simple squamous epithelium is probably my favorite epithelium because it's only one layer of cells if it's simple squamous. If it's multiple layers of squamous cells, then it would be stratified squamous. And you can clearly see that it's stratified. You can see only one layer of cells is attached to the basement membrane. Then you have cuboidal, or kind of squarish. And look for the nucleus. The nucleus is usually in the center. And that has a basement membrane if it's simple cuboidal. And the third cartoon here is columnar, which is more rectangular in shape. And usually the nucleus is towards the bottom. So you look for, like when you look at the cells, like you'll see one layer. This is simple columnar epithelium. So you can try to look for the nucleus. There's one nucleus. Here's the membrane. And don't forget the cell membrane too. You could see that in histology in the microscope. And maybe you guys saw that when you looked at the starfish or the whitefish and the onion cell, which the onion has a cell wall, but we have plasma membranes. So here's simple epithelium. If you don't have to look back, what type of shape would this be?
Squamous?
Yeah, you got it. Squamous. I love squamous. Squamous. It's like paver stone. If you look at the top of it from here, if you're looking down at it, it's kind of like a paver stone. It's kind of oblong shape. See the nucleus in the middle, flat, kind of wide, oblong for sure. So this one is stratified, right? And you name the tissue after the top surface. So this kind of looks like paver stone. So technically this is stratified squamous. Starts out looking cuboidal, but you can't name this stratified cuboidal. There's not too many places, and I'll show you where we have stratified cuboidal. But stratified squamous is the one I'm going to show you. That definitely will be on the test because we have to look really close at those. They'll all be on the test. What am I saying? So squamous is that flat one, cuboidal, and then columnar. And you could have simple or stratified, and then there's like pseudo-stratified, right? So here's the cartoon. This is the way you do it. Look at the cartoon, okay? He's talking about a squamous. I see a basement membrane. I see the top of the cells look squamous, and from the side it looks really flat. So, okay, this must be simple squamous. And then you got to tell me what the function is. Now, what do you think? I mean, simple squamous is where you see most diffusion, like in the lungs. Oxygen, carbon dioxide, right? Diffusing in and out of cells. You get it, right? Those lipid soluble molecules. And filtration is also, so like a filter, like in the kidney, you have a glomerulus. Unfortunately, I always say this, but you're not going to learn that this semester. But filtration is what happens in the kidney. Remember I said the kidney filters and reabsorbs? So simple squamous is for things to go through. Like these are the air sacs called alveoli. Is the word down here? Alveoli of the lungs. Think alveoli, think lungs, air sacs, diffusion. Oxygen in through this nice simple squamous epithelium, carbon dioxide out, and hopefully into the blood and back to the heart and then back to the lungs. So diffusion, especially in the lungs. So here's what you have to know. What it is, the name of it, what it looks like, what is its function, and where can we find this? Okay. And this is just lab for now. And then we'll see how we do in lecture. We might not have to do this on lecture if you guys get it now. So now, what do you think this is? This one up here. Here's the basement membrane. These are kind of square. The nucleus is kind of in the middle in the cartoon. So what do you think this one is?
Cuboidal.
Yeah, it's cuboidal, and it's one layer, so it's simple cuboidal. Right. So this function of simple cuboidal, I like more absorption with simple cuboidal, but it's okay. We'll say secretion. You could say either, but secretion. Let's say secretion. Let's keep it nice and neat. So let's take a look at this. And this is a classic cuboidal. This is definitely the one you're gonna see. So you don't see, and this is real histology. So of course there's going to be, you might not see a nucleus everywhere, but look, you see the nucleus? Yeah. You see right here, this line right here is the plasma membrane of the cell. And this thing around it is the basement membrane. Don't look at this one, look at another one. Then you have like blood vessels in between. This is blood cells in here. And you see this right here? That's the lumen. The lumen, the space where the filtrate in the kidneys is going through, whether the pee-pee is going to go into the Chipotle bathroom, it's going to come back into the blood and increase my blood volume. So this is classic. You see, this is simple cuboidal. I don't want to draw all over it, but this is classic, especially the one I just draw all over. That's probably the best one. Like if I had to pick the best one, it would be this one. Like see this cell right here? You see the basement membrane, you see the plasma membrane, you see the nucleus, you see the lumen. That's a simple cuboidal. Can't get any better than that. Even if we had the microscope, probably would be a harder time finding that. So where do we find it? In the kidney tubules. Fine. Kidney tubules. They're cells that either reabsorb or filter out. Okay, let's take a look at this one now. Let's go to the cartoon and basement membrane. Let's look. Okay, here's a basement membrane. This is nothing looks like this besides epithelial tissue. I see a nucleus. I see cytoplasm. I see a membrane. And on top, you know, it looks kind of square like the top of a rectangle. So what would this one be? What would you say? What shape?
Columnar.
Columnar. Simple or stratified?
Simple.
Yeah, it's simple. So this is simple columnar epithelium. Perfect. So now we got that down. What's the function of that? What's the function? I like absorption for this one. Remember this, I'm recording this, so hear what I say. So it's absorbing most of the time. And where do we want to absorb things? In the digestive tract. So you could say digestive tract, and you could say small intestine. You hear the small intestine. You should know where that is too, based on the organ systems they have to know for lab 1, lab 2. So yeah, the small intestine, the intestinal system, the gastrointestinal system, that's where we're going to find. We want to absorb. Where are we eating today, Anthony, Valerie? We're eating at Chipotle again. So you want to absorb sometimes. Sometimes it's not always absorption, but you want to absorb into these cells. They're more about absorbing, bringing things back in and then going into the blood. So look at this small lumen. Now let's go over to the real histology now. Let's go to the real histology of this tissue. I don't want to make it too big. So now we got, this is the lumen in here. This is where the chipotle is going through, right? The little beans, and it's broken down though. It's broken down to carbohydrates. Now it's like disaccharides at this point, amino acids maybe, right? So that's the lumen. This one's kind of tough to see a basement membrane. I don't see a good basement membrane. Maybe there is one. Maybe you could find one. But do you notice that the nucleus, let's look binuclear, this one. Nucleus is one nucleus per cell. This is the plasma membrane. All this is the cytoplasm. Yeah? So this is the digestive tract. So we also have these big bulbous, they look like pimp cups full of something. But what is the something? It's mucus, or mucin is the precursor to mucus. So these are goblet cells. Goblet cells, right? Look, they're going to secrete mucus into the lumen to help the chipotle get its way out, or have the nutrients be reabsorbed. And on top of this, now, this is an accessory structure called microvilli. And I told you, microvilli, these little hair-like structures that are on top of the cell, these are for absorption. They absorb. They have high surface areas, a lot of surface area for extra absorption of those amino acids, the glucose, the fatty acids, and then ultimately it takes it back to the blood. So this is simple columnar epithelium with microvilli and goblet cells. So be able to point out a goblet cell. You know I'm going to put that on something, on a test, of course. I'm going to do that. Okay, now this is a little weird, so stay with me here. So let's look at the cartoon first. Okay, now this is the tricky one. This is the one you got to remember. Basement membrane, yeah. Now we got to figure out, is this one layer or not? And it kind of looks like it's stratified because it's got nuclei all over the place. But if the cartoon shows you that every cell in this histology is connected to the basement membrane, therefore it's not stratified. It looks stratified, so it's falsely looking stratified. That's why you call it pseudo stratified. Okay, and you think this is more cuboidal, columnar, or squamous?
Squamous?
No, it's pretty tall. It's pretty tall. They're kind of like this. So they're more columnar. So it's pseudo-stratified columnar. Sorry. And this happened, now we have to look at the real anatomy, but it's pseudo-stratified columnar. Now what's the function of this? Secretion, yes, in most places. Mucus is going to be involved. Here's the lumen, let's say, of the trachea and airway, right? Because that's where we're going to find this. That's a great answer for pseudo-stratified columnar epithelial location. So not only is it pseudo-stratified columnar, but it also has cilia on it. So cilia is not for absorption. Cilia is for moving mucus or moving anything. So it's not moving the cell like a flagella. Flagella is a tail. It's moving the mucus. So let me just for the hell of it, what is this cell right here? This white-looking cell. Come on, let's get this one. Here's another one. What is that? What kind of cell is that? That's usually mixed in these simple columnar areas. And it's producing something into the lumen. You with me? What cell is that? Can't find another one. Here's another one right here.
Is it the goblet cell?
That's the goblet cell. Yeah, get that down. I want to put that on. And here's the cilia. So this is pseudo-stratified columnar ciliated epithelium. And this is what you got to do every time. You say, okay, this is what it looks like. Here's the histology. What's its function? Secretion. And it's ciliated, so propulsion of mucus, including the goblet cells. Where do you find it? In the respiratory system, especially the upper respiratory system and the trachea. The upper respiratory system technically is above the larynx, but trachea is starting the lower respiratory. So you can just say upper respiratory or trachea. It's a lot of stuff, my friends. It's probably my second favorite epithelium. It's a simple squamous. Okay, so now we have what's called, well, you tell me. Looks like paver stones on the top. On the bottom, you see a basement membrane. So there's a basement membrane, and then you see one layer, and then you see multi-stacked layers that get thin and paver-like on top. So is this squamous, cuboidal, or columnar? Base it on this. Base it on what you see on top.
Cuboidal.
Yeah, this is squamous. Even though it looks cuboidal, I know that's confusing. It looks cuboidal on the bottom, and that's completely normal. But they get squamous-like when you go up here. And the top is how you name it, apical surface. So now this is multi-layers. This is like your epidermis or your skin or your esophagus, vagina, or any place where there's membranes and abrasions, like especially your esophagus and your skin, right? And the birth canal and vagina. So this function is protection. Underlying tissues, so it protects anything that's under it. Like under the skin, you have your dermis, and then you have hypodermis. And underneath your esophagus lining, remember, epithelial tissue lines and covers, and it's glandular, it secretes. Really important. So where do we find it? We're going to find it in the esophagus, vagina, or the outer layer of skin. But you can't really say skin, and I'll tell you why. Because this is non-keratinized. How would you know that? It's hard to say, but let's take a look here. So let's take a look at this. So keratinized is not going to be a question I'd ask you on a big picture like this. Okay, here's a lumen. Lumen, let's say, of the esophagus. All right, this is above the stomach. This is where the chipotle is coming down and scratching up. I got whole wheat, what do you call those things? Tortillas going down there, ice cubes, all kinds of stuff. So the basement membrane is down here. This is connective tissue deep in the esophageal region. Here's all the bottom nuclei, and then it gets layered on top. You gotta really look close here. Okay, and this is non-keratinized. There's no keratin in your esophagus or your vagina attached to this or inside these cells. Keratin is a protein that we see in the skin. So the only place you're going to see keratin is in your skin, hair, and nails. And you're going to see that's also stratified squamous. So this is stratified squamous epithelium. Probably the one you'd see pretty clearly if we were in the lab. Okay, this one's very common. And can't see really the basement membrane here, but picture it's on the bottom. So what shape is this one? Squamous, cuboidal, or
Cuboidal.
Oh, that's cuboidal. Yeah, this is cuboidal. It looks squarish. The nucleus is in the middle. You can see the membrane. So function, protection, okay, but it's also secretion. And secretion, like within ducts. So you could say protection, it's fine. So salivary glands, cuboidal, and this is stratified cuboidal, right? It's stratified. There's two layers, correct? So if this is a gland, like a salivary gland or a sweat gland, this is all the lumen. Remember this word lumen, I use that a lot, because just so you know, this is the lumen. So this is the tissue, and I'll have a pointer pointing to it. And you can see that there's two layers of cells by the nuclei. So this is stratified cuboidal, not simple cuboidal, stratified. Hard to see the basement membrane, so the real histology. And there it is, your sweat glands. And the ducts of the sweat glands. And there's a duct in the kidney called the collecting tube. So the ducts of sweat glands. So protection or secretion, I'm good with both. Stratified columnar is kind of rare. This is kind of rare, stratified columnar. And this is a tough one to see because it looks like it starts out cuboidal, but this is clearly columnar. And it's clearly stratified. This is not pseudo-stratified. This is definitely a protection and secretion as well. And this is rare. This is the one you only see in the male urethra. Remember the male urethra, I guess. Although, again, we don't do that. Some glands have this as well in the ovary, actually. But this is a tough one to see. So let's see if we can figure this out. What's a good way to show you? Like these up here, not quite cuboidal. The basement membrane is down here, right? I don't clearly see a lumen here. So this is a tough one, and it's a rare one. Not my favorite, okay? But this is stratified columnar epithelium. Some of the slides were good in lab though last semester. This one's really hard, so I'll probably give you one or the other. This is actually two different types of epithelium, and it looks stratified, and there's mix in here. There's like mixed size, mixed shape. So this is called transitional. And where we see this is in the urinary bladder mostly, because picture this, something that stretches, and the function is stretching and tight junctions. So it permits the stretching and compliance of the bladder as it fills and empties when I go to the bathroom at Chipotle, all right? So this is pretty much the lumen of the bladder, let's say. And it could be ureters too. Ureters are these tubes that take filtrate, or really it's urine now, and the ureters to the urinary. This is the urinary bladder, and then this is the urethra. So it pretty much lines all of those areas that stretch, and it's called transitional. So when you hear transitional for our exam, think urinary bladder. Okay, and see what it looks like. Nothing looks like this really. It's not pseudo-stratified. You don't see goblet cells here. Right, nuclei kind of changing their shape. Not easy. Okay, any questions about epithelial tissue? So you look what it looks like, the description of it. Then you know what the function is, and then you know where it would be. So use your departmental lab guide and fill those out, help you with those. It's not easy, like knowing transitional is not easy. If you have the lab book, the big, heavy, expensive one, there's some different pictures in there too. And I'll do my best next week to see if we can get some video of the slides. Somehow or another, we can make it work. Okay. So you know my two favorites though, right? Simple squamous and pseudo-stratified ciliated columnar epithelium. Okay, let's rock this. Now we're getting into connective tissue. And this is just an overview of connective tissue. Areolar connective tissue is a form of loose connective tissue. Loose, because you're going to have dense as well. Loose and dense, and then you have irregular, dense, and then you have special types of connective tissue. So what did I say? The definition of connective tissue. It's sparse cells, which means like spread out, different types of cells, multicellular, sparse cells, and a matrix. Sometimes the matrix could be called a ground substance. So we'll talk about the cells in the matrix as we go into each connective tissue. But this is a pretty good example because you got pretty much everything here in loose connective tissue. So you have thick fibers. And what's the most abundant protein in your body? I had to mention this. It begins with a col, ends with a gen. Right? Collagen is a protein.
Collagen.
And that's the most abundant protein in your body. Keratin is the most abundant protein in your skin. But collagen is so abundant because connective tissue is the most abundant tissue in your body. So you have a lot of thick collagen fibers, and that's what gives you strength. So the matrix of connective tissue is really based on how much collagen it has. Like loose connective tissue has a lesser amount of collagen, but dense connective tissue has tons of collagen, thick and strong. Then you have other tissue cells like a macrophage, right? Remember, macrophage is the big eater, the Pac-Man, and that's a tissue cell derived from white blood cells. So this is there for immunity, to keep the tissue nice and healthy and destroy anything that could be in there. And you could have blood cells in there like lymphocytes, white blood cell. This is also immunity. Crazy stuff. And then you have fibroblasts, which are basically cells that are laying collagen down. They're making collagen, laying it down. All the machinery, all the rough endoplasmic reticulum that's in there, the ribosomes, are all building collagen for this connective tissue. So the ground substance is mostly loose pieces of collagen, and you have the thick collagen in between. Then you have these elastic fibers. This has everything, so this is kind of good. Elastic fibers gives it compliance, elasticity. So you're going to see this elastic connective tissue, which is different. So this has all the parts. This is areolar connective tissue, which is loose. And then you have reticular fibers, which also is protein that gives it some structure, thinner than the collagen fibers. So get used to saying collagen fibers, elastic fibers, and reticular fibers. And you'll see it come up in different slides. This is definitely the most difficult tissue in histology. Then you could have adipose cells, which are fat cells, globulal fat with triglycerides in there. And then it's very vascular. Capillaries are thin-walled. One layer of simple squamous epithelium in capillary just for diffusion. Oxygen, carbon dioxide to feed all these cells that are supporting this loose areolar connective tissue. And then you have mast cell. Now, mast cell is also immune. And remember this. This is important. Listen up. Mast cells secrete histamine. Histamine is very important in the inflammatory process, as is macrophages. So histamine is released when there's injury, like a bee sting or a broken vessel, and it causes inflammation, right? So when you're allergic to something, you have excess inflammation, excess histamine release. You take what's that stuff? Begins with a Ben, ends with a drill. Benadryl, right? We still take that stuff. It's an antihistamine because it stops the swelling, stops the inflammation, sometimes helps you breathe. So mast cells, again, white blood cell derivative that produce and release histamine in the tissue. This is a tissue cell. Macrophage is a tissue cell. Lymphocyte happens to be a white blood cell that infiltrates the tissue. Tissue, God bless you. Neutrophil is also a white blood cell, and that's the most abundant white blood cell. And this is released in times of bacterial infections, neutrophil. So they're all the cells. But I think the fibers, for us, the fibers are the most important. I think so. And you should know where blood vessels are now, even though, again, we're not learning on blood vessels. And then these other sparse cells are more like protective immunity. Fat cells is for storing energy within there. Sometimes for cushioning, but this is loose areolar connective tissue. So I probably won't ask this, but take a look at it. This is embryonic connective tissue, right? It's got a jelly-like matrix, right? It has fibers and mesenchymal cells. This is a precursor. This is like stem tissue. Like, look at this. This is Anthony when he was like 7 weeks old right here. Tissues aren't even really developed yet. You look like a salamander. So this term mesenchymal is the stem cell for all connective tissue. It's called mesenchyme, derived from mesoderm, mesenchyme, connective tissue. And this is going to ultimately become your blood cells, your bone cells, your adipose cells. And this is embryonic. So an embryo is like your first 8 weeks of life. Your zygote, you know the story. I tell you this all the time. Friday night when the sperm meets the oocyte in the fallopian tube, and then the two nuclei fuse together to form a diploid cell. Then it implants in the uterus, and then off you go. You got a new Anthony in 40 weeks. But this is the start. It's a gelatinous ground substance that's actually produced by the mesenchymal cell. So let's take a closer look here. Let's get these points in case that shows up. Mesenchymal tissue, stem tissue, embryonic. Very, very new Anthony. And then let's move on. This is loose connective tissue, areolar. Kind of looks like that first one, right? Kind of looks like that first one. So this time I think we should look at the histology first, because the cartoon doesn't help me here. Cartoon does not help me. I got to look at this. This looks kind of like a weird, it's not as good as my drawings, but I mean, it kind of looks like a weird art thing you'd see. So let's take a look. You have these thick things in here. That's collagen fibers. You could see the nuclei of the cells, and these cells would be fibroblasts because they're producing the collagen, really laying down the ground substance in between, which is all protein. And the thin ones are elastic fibers, and I don't see any reticular fibers in here. So I'm going to be pretty lenient with you folks when it comes to elastic versus reticular fibers. But what you're going to have to know is what elastic connective tissue looks like versus reticular connective tissue. Thank you. So what is this? This is areolar connective tissue. And three main fiber type cells, and there's a macrophages in there. Sometimes there's other immune cells. So this function is Cushing's organs. Cushing's organs, it holds organs in place. And sometimes they call this word stroma. Stroma is like the packaging and the connective tissue that holds your heart together, that holds your lungs in place, that holds your kidneys together, connective tissue. And usually that's loose connective tissue, which we call areolar. Let's all say it together, areolar. And that's loose. That's not dense, it's loose. The most common type of connective tissue. It's behind everything. It's behind all your organs and membranes. I like this packages organs. That's one of my favorite ways to say it. All right, so even below the epithelium, even below the basement membrane, sometimes a gland is anchored by areolar connective tissue that looks kind of loose like this. So good luck with that one. That's tough. This is easy. This is an easy one. I think this is one of the easiest ones. This looks like big open cells of stuff in the middle. It's like they call it vacuole. You know, vacuole, like a big container. And look at the nucleus is like peripheral. It's kind of on the end. And you see the membrane of the cell, the membrane and the nucleus. This, my friends, is a connective tissue called adipose. All that yellow stuff that you have around your organs and behind your eye, in your belly, around you, in the breast tissue, around the mammary glands, is adipose. We get plenty of that at Popeyes. I don't know about Chipotle. Chipotle too, yeah. Right? So it's also loose. So this is another form of loose connective tissue. Shoo. All right? Sparse cells. Adipocytes are the name of these cells. And triglycerides are in here. And that's storage of long-term energy. This is why we had to learn all that stuff at the beginning. You never know. So this is under skin, like a place called the hypodermis. Might as well learn this now because this will be the second half of today. So the hypodermis all has adipose. Right below the dermis. Like the skin, the outer part is called epidermis, which is all epithelial tissue. Stratified squamous epidermis is what it is. Keratinized too. And then below the epidermis, you have the dermis. And there you have some dense irregular connective tissue, which you'll see. But below the dermis is the hypodermis, and that is mostly adipose, under the skin, and around things like your eyes. You'll see that when I cut up the cow eye later on in the semester. Abdomen, around the breast tissue. Yes, adipose. That's what it looks like, my friends. So here is the one you got to kind of memorize, and you go through this real quick before you go into the test. This is reticular connective tissue, and it's still loose connective tissue. So it's a network of reticular fibers. So they stain this way too. They stain darker than collagen. And there's a lot of vascularity. You have blood supply in there. So this is like the steel that holds the organs to like the spine or to the back. You know, within the organ, you have the areolar connective tissue, but here you have the real, like the steel that really holds it up, gives it support. So every stroma. Yeah, I like it. Stroma. Cells are not stroma. Cells are parenchyma, and that's the functioning part of it. So I like this, the kidney, where it shows like the kidney, because the kidney kind of is held towards the back, retroperitoneal, right behind all the abdominal organs, which you learned in lab. So this is loose connective tissue, but this is reticular. CT. You could say that. It's reticular CT. So get to know that. No elastic fibers in there. None. Right? So this is dense regular. This is a tough one. I'll tell you why in a second. This is dense regular. This is the one you probably would have told me, like a tendon or a ligament, right? A tendon connects muscle to bone, or a ligament connects bone to bone, so you don't sprain your joint. And this is the shoulder. So tendons, ligaments, and aponeurosis is another term for fascia. Like, you know, when you have red meat, like steak, right? I mean, there's fat marbling in there, adipose, but fascia is the white, tough stuff that you're really not supposed to eat. It's just hard protein, dense, regular connective tissue. It always goes back to food. Okay, so this is what it looks like. And my problem with this one, and remember, this is dense, regular, not irregular, CT. My problem with this one is it kind of looks like smooth muscle. So remember that later. So again, before you go into the exam, Finizio said that you look at dense regular connective tissue and look at smooth muscle and see the difference. And it's kind of subtle at first glance, but once you look at it, you'll see the difference in this is all collagen. This is not contractile muscle tissue. This is collagen fibers. And stains red, just like muscle. That's the problem, because muscle has protein too. And here's fibroblast, which is laying down the collagen. So the machinery in a fibroblast, again, is about building those amino acids for collagen. Collagen. I bet you I say that 60 times before we're done here. Collagen. Start counting. Appleton, start counting. Okay, so this is the attachments. This is what you probably thought connective tissue was before you entered this class. And I probably did too. That's attachment, but connective tissue is so much more. So this is dense regular. That's my point. That's the takeaway. Yeah. So this is elastic connective tissue. And this one is definitely going to be on the test. I got to look really close, right? Look at that. It looks wavy. Does that look wavy to you? Dark lines. Well, let me tell you, my friends, this is the aorta. This is the aorta. This is like where all the blood from the left ventricle just pounds into there. And look, it's red too, like it's supposed to be. And it goes to every part of your body, upper and lower. So you need elasticity. So here's the lumen. And this is where the blood cells are, like the white blood cell and the red blood cell has no nucleus, the white blood cell and the platelets and all the plasma. So it's banging against the wall very hard. So the aorta is where you find elastic connective tissue, one of the places. Now, I'm not saying cartilage. Now later on, you're going to hear what cartilage is, which is also connective tissue, but this is called elastic CT. And this is in a lot of tissue. It's in all blood vessels, but really, really elastic in the aorta. Like there's elastic connective tissue in a lot of places, like in the lungs, it expands. There's elastic connective tissue around the bladder too, besides the transitional epithelium. But this is not elastic cartilage. Know the difference between elastic cartilage and elastic CT. What we're looking at here, my friends, is elastic CT, elastic connective tissue. Because that's what we're talking about, connective tissue. Yes. So this is dense irregular. Yeah. So this is not quite as dense. Okay. It's not quite as dense as dense regular, right? So I always look at this, okay, there's this collagen really thick, but there's more space in between. Let's look back. Let's see if I can get you back at the other one. This is, so I see all this red here. That's areolar. That's dense regular. That's dense irregular. Dense regular. Dense irregular. I mean, if you're scared, you're in a practical. What the hell is he talking about? This looks just like, you know, muscle, but this is dense irregular. So it's still dense because of the thickness of that collagen. It's irregular, and because it's not, it's kind of sparse, more sparse. I use the word sparse probably 10 times. And this is CT. All right, connective tissue. And same thing, you got fibroblasts laying down collagen fibers. You have the ground substance. There's less space, though, in these dense ones, even though this has more space in between the collagen, more ground substance in between the collagen than does dense. Whew. And that's able to withstand movement in many directions, like a joint capsule. Like these, you're going to hear this term, too. Like it's called synovial joint. That's the most movable joint in your body when we do articulations very soon. And this is dense irregular connective tissue, the joint capsule. It's like if you have like a connective tissue ace bandage around your joints. Very cool. Prone to injury. But dermis of the skin also. Remember the dermis? Let's go through this. See how your memory is. The skin consists of an outer layer, which is called epidermis, because epi means outer. The epidermis is all stratified squamous epithelial tissue. The dermis is right below that. That's why they call it epidermis. It's above. The dermis is below that. And there's a lot of goodies in the dermis. There you have a lot of vascularity. You have sebaceous glands spitting out the oily sebum. You have your hair follicles. You have sensory receptors. It's a beautiful area. So that dermis is dense, irregular connective tissue. So hopefully you remember that. It's a hell of a lot of stuff. 2 weeks though, 2 weeks. We're going to get there. This is my favorite. Now we're talking about cartilage though. We're talking about cartilage. This is cartilage now. So change gears, you know, hit the clutch, downshift a little bit, and slow down. So cartilage is a special type of connective tissue. Cartilage is a special type of connective tissue. And I think you're going to learn 3 of them. Yeah, 3, I think. So this is called, let's just draw it, say it a billion times, hyaline. Cartilage now. I'm saying cartilage. Emily, you with me? Not just CT. It's just cartilage. It is connective tissue, though. So this is under connective tissue because it's look at this collagen. This is just thick ground substance, all collagen. And this is really important. This is all our long bones. Remember the long bones, right? Valerie Anthony, even that stupid little, I wouldn't even spend $1 to get a painted toenail, toe, the small 5th digit on the foot. That's derived from hyaline cartilage. All long bones start out, like remember little Anthony in the uterus there in the first 8 weeks? So that's when your bones start to develop from cartilage. So cartilage always comes first. And guess what type of cartilage? Come on, you could tell me. It's hyaline cartilage. Amorphous means it really doesn't take a specific shape, but it's got a beautiful picture. You can draw this too. You should be drawing all this stuff. It's the best way to learn it. So now we're going to use a term called, or a prefix called chondro. So chondrocyte is the functional cell of cartilage. Chondro. Chondro. Prefix. There's a prefix, means cartilage. Osteo means bone. So the cartilage cell is a chondrocyte. And then it says in lacuna. You have to know that. Lacuna means lake. So that this is the chondrocyte nucleus, that dark staining thing. And it's kind of just laying in this little lake, like it's just sunning itself in this lacuna. It's like a little crib, a watery crib. It just hangs out and lays down collagen and keeps the cartilage strong. It's important. There's a lot of cushioning involved here, support. So remember the costal cartilage? I hate to hit you with another prefix, but costal means rib. And the costal cartilage is made of hyaline cartilage. Your larynx, your Adam's apple, if you're a guy, is made of hyaline cartilage. The cartilage on your nose is hyaline cartilage. But most important for us, because I'm the lecture lab guy, you got to know that hyaline cartilage is the precursor tissue of all our long bones. And what's the precursor tissue of connective tissue? It's mesenchyme. So getting complicated now, we're into cartilage. So I like this one. I think this one, I'll put stars and I'll make a heart, right? Emoji with a thumb up, whatever. Okay, so that's hyaline cartilage. Did I say hyaline cartilage? Say it all the time. So now this is elastic cartilage. So again, you have to look at this. This is elastic cartilage. And I yelled at you before, I wasn't yelling at you, I was just making a point, that there's a difference between elastic CT, elastic connective tissue, and elastic cartilage. This is elastic cartilage, and this is what it looks like. The elastic CT is in every blood vessel, but mostly the aorta. So elastic cartilage looks like this, first of all, similar to hyaline cartilage. Nothing similar to hyaline cartilage. Screw that, Marieb, right? So this is a lot of elastic fibers in between. So this is a visual. You have to know the difference between this and reticular, I think, of the two, like reticular connective tissue versus elastic cartilage. This is cartilage. This is one of the cartilage people. So let's call it elastic cartilage. Okay, and it still has a chondrocyte because chondro means cartilage. So we're pointing to that. You could say that's the chondrocyte in lacuna, sunning itself in the lacuna. And here's the matrix, which is a lot of elastic fibers, but still this is cartilage. And where the hell do we find this stuff? There's only like 3 places that I can even know. Where I only know 3 places where there's elastic cartilage. 3 places, that's it. In this whole body, which has trillions of cells. One, you know what this thing is? This is the ear, right? That helix, that auricle, kind of like a satellite dish that brings vibration into your middle ear, into the inner ear. So that's elastic cartilage. Then the structure called the epiglottis. Epiglottis covers your windpipe. The glottis is the opening to the windpipe. So the food doesn't go down. And that's elastic cartilage. Then there's a tube that goes from your middle ear into your throat. It's called the eustachian tube or auditory tube. You know when the kids have their tube, the babies, they have their tubes replaced because they get ear infections all the time? Because the eustachian tube, also known as the auditory tube, connects the middle ear to the nasopharynx, the throat. So you get strep, it can jump up there and get into the ear. So the eustachian tube is another one. I'll call it the auditory tube. So what are we talking about? Elastic cartilage. This is what it looks like. 3 places are the ear, the epiglottis, and the eustachian tube, also known as the auditory. Same thing. So know what it looks like. Yeah. So here's the last cartilage, and this is called fibrocartilage. Here it gets a little confusing. It stains different. It's a little wavier. It's got chondrocytes, not fibroblast nuclei, chondrocytes, because you see chondrocyte, what you're not going to see, all you're going to see is this tissue and say, what the hell is that? Is that dense regular? No, because I see the lacunae. Is it elastic? Could be, but it's not so wavy. It's not showing me a lumen. I do see some thick collagen there. It's not dense irregular or dense irregular. This is fibrocartilage. And this is something you'll see in a skeletal system. Actually all cartilage is an accessory to the skeletal system. So this cartilage is found in the intervertebral discs. Remember the vertebrae? We kind of looked at those. You had the 5 lumbar, which always count down. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, right? Lumbars, lumbar vertebrae. And in between all the vertebrae, except for C1 and C2, there's no intervertebral disc. There isn't an intervertebral disc between the sacrum and L5. So this is that area that you might hear people, getting hurt or falling, sports injury, car accident, where you have a herniated disc, and the little disc inside this fibrocartilage kind of moves out of place and presses on a spinal nerve. Very painful, causes pain down the leg like sciatica and things like that. So intervertebral disc is one. The other is the meniscus of the knee. Meniscus, there's two meniscus, medial and lateral in each knee. That's fibrocartilage. And the pubic symphysis. Pubic symphysis, that's that thing in the front. So we do skeletal system. That's a pretty good landmark to see where the pubic bone is. So this is fibrocartilage. So that's it for the cartilage. I don't think there's any more cartilage. So there's three types of cartilage. There's hyaline, elastic, and fibrocartilage. And then you have to go back to all the connective tissues. It's crazy, man. It's crazy. How long have we been here? Over an hour? Everybody okay? So it's like a visual thing. I don't know what to tell you. You know, I think sometimes we used to use coloring books in anatomy. Really, we use coloring books to actually draw the colors and draw what you do with the staining, you know, like in lab. But even if we were in lab, you'd only be in there for that one day, right? And then you wouldn't see the actual slides at home. So you have to figure a way to do it. And again, use your lab book, use these slides, use this recording, whatever helps you. Okay. So let me finish this lab and then we'll take a break. How's that? Okay. And the good news is next week, I'm going to do exactly the same thing, but in lab, unless there's a snowstorm or a tsunami or something, or global pandemic or whatever the hell can happen. Right, Anthony Granados? Yeah. So let's get back to this. So this is another connective tissue. This one is one you're going to have to know very well. This is compact bone. Let me just write that for you. Compact bone, because there's spongy bone too. This is compact bone. But I think for this lab, you know, you really, bone is fine. If you put bone as an answer on our practical, and a couple of quizzes I'll throw at you, I would just, you could just put bone, but this is truly compact bone. There's a long bone, there's a humerus. Right, so what we have here is this system of these circular structures. And these are called, get ready for this, it's called osteon. Osteo means bone, right? But osteon is this whole circle of structures. It's kind of like a tree with rungs, and there's multiple osteons. And they have these little dark spots. Let's see, I'll get you close up. So these dark spots, they kind of look like ants now. These are, again, oh, that's too big, that's too freaky. These are osteocytes in lacunae, but osteo now, right? Osteo means bone. Chondro is cartilage. Lamella means the layers. There's always different names for things in anatomy. Isn't that tunics and lamellae, stratum? It just drives me crazy. Central canal is right in the middle of the diversion system, and that's delivering all the nutrients and taking out the wastes. And there's little canaliculi, little canals that kind of feed the osteocytes in the lacunae. Remember, lacunae means lake. Lacuna, if you like. Lacuna sounds better, right? So bone, I mean, this is really what you need to know in this semester, right? We're doing bone, right? So we know the functions of bone: protection, movement, storage of minerals like calcium and phosphate. But really, the real magical thing about bone, does anybody know the biggest thing that really excites me about bone? The function. It's not just, I mean, storing calcium is pretty cool. That's a good one, phosphate. But hematopoiesis is the big deal with bone. It makes blood cells. That's what that means. Makes blood cells. Hemato means blood. Poiesis means to manufacture, to make. So all your blood cells, red blood cells, which is really what your body really needs to carry oxygen. White blood cells for your immune system, like the macrophages and the leukocytes and the neutrophils and the mast cells are all part of that. And then the platelets too for clotting. So it all happens in the bone, and technically not in this compact bone though, but still you have to know this is bone tissue. I think this is the easiest thing to see. Bone tissue, what that looks like. This is blood. Blood is a connective tissue. So know this one well. So You notice that these cells have that little whitish kind of void in the middle. Well, these are red blood cells because they don't have a nucleus. They're biconcave discs built to carry oxygen. And all this white in between is your plasma. Plasma, right? Say it like that, plasma. Then over here, you can't, it's not labeled, but this little fragmented cell is called a platelet. And that's for clotting. And then these are white blood cells. You really don't have to know the names. I mean, it'd be great if you did. Like lymphocyte has this big, huge nucleus. And the neutrophil has like an amorphous nucleus and a lot of granules in it. It's one of the phils. That's a neutrophil. This guy, he destroys bacteria, the neutrophil. The lymphocyte's more about viruses, maybe cancer. And the plasma is all the space in between. So this is another easy one. Like these extra ones at the end, like bone, all you got to say is bone and know the function. And this one, all you got to know is it's blood. And I might point out a red blood cell because I need you to know that as soon as possible. So, of course, respiratory gases. Come on, lady, this is oxygen and carbon dioxide. Gases, tell the kids what this is. Let the people know. Let my people free. All right, and where is it? It's in the blood vessels. That's the only place you want blood. And this is blood, remember. It's connective tissue. We're talking about connective tissue. It has sparse cells and a matrix. It happens to have a liquid matrix, though. There's no collagen here. It's not dense. It's not elastic. This is a fluid matrix within the vessels. Like this is a capillary. But guess what? Like you see this epithelium that lines the capillary? That's simple squamous. So capillary, not an artery, vein, or aorta. No. Capillaries is where the magic happens. That's where we have diffusion, oxygen in, carbon dioxide out into the lungs and out. We want oxygen to get in the, if this was the lungs, right? The alveoli. There's capillaries in the alveoli where the oxygen comes into the capillary and it binds to the red, well, not to the red blood cell, to the actual hemoglobin inside the red blood cell. Carbon dioxide is kind of carried a little bit differently, but oxygen and hemoglobin in the red blood cell is really important. So know what it looks like. You're looking at it, right, as we're talking here. This one is, don't get this confused with reticular. These are neurons, multiple neurons. This is nerve tissue. So this could be your brain, it could be your spinal cord. Not likely to be out in the periphery, but it could be. So this one's a tough one out. This is a neuron. Neuron has like a cell body with a nucleus. Then it has these long extensions called axons. But again, for this, we're going to learn that ad nauseum in a month or so. But you just have to know this is nerve tissue. You see the cell bodies. Looks like a kite to me, you know, like somebody's flying a kite in this picture. Then there's nucleus of other cells, because there's two types of cells in the nervous system. There's neurons, and then there's what's called glial cells. That's supportive cells. Technically, they're kind of like epithelial cells. And most of the nervous system is glial cells. But the functioning cell of the nervous system is the neuron, and that's this Ben Franklin kite here. These are all axon processes. You can call these stringy things. It's just, remember, this is not reticular fibers. This is not elastic fibers. These are neurons. This is nerve tissue. So take a close look. Look in the book. Look in the lab manual that you spent all that money on. It's probably the same picture, though. Yeah. So the matrix, and again, this is not connective tissue. Let me start by saying that. This is not connective tissue. Now we're into nervous tissue, right? We just jumped. Sorry, I jumped into another tissue without assuming that you knew that. But this is nervous tissue now. Yeah, so we're not looking for sparse cells in a matrix here. This is specific cells. Bone is connective tissue. Adipose is connective tissue, but now we're in nervous tissue. And I think that's the only picture you need to know. Well, the only type of picture you need to know. Now, here we go. Now we're into muscle tissue in a totally different tissue. Now, stay with me here. Okay, so this is skeletal muscle. This is the muscles we're going to talk about mostly in A&P1. And skeletal muscle contraction and skeletal muscle metabolism, skeletal muscle oxygenation, skeletal muscle created contraction through nervous impulse and receptors and all that. So look at it. What do you see? It's very linear. It means it's like a lot of straight lines, right? A lot of straight lines, and they call those striations. So skeletal muscle, first of all, is voluntary, which means we can control it. Our brains, our cerebrum, our cerebral cortex tells the muscle, skeletal muscles to contract through the nervous system. No, it needs the nervous system. It needs nervous impulse, but it starts in our brains. So skeletal muscle is the only one of the three that's voluntary. It's also striated, which means it has thick and thin protein fibers that are contractile fibers. You're going to hear the words actin and myosin. Myosin is the thick filaments or the thick proteins. Actin is thin or lighter proteins. It's multinucleated. Many nuclei, sorry. Thousands it could be in one muscle belly. And the nucleus is peripheral, which means it's to the side of the cells, not in the middle. So all of this is a muscle cell, like this is a muscle cell with all the striations. That's what we're looking at in line, like if they're all bundled together, and that's the way it works, you know. This is the triceps brachii muscle in the back of the arm. So it has a tendon, and then you have all that contractile muscle tissue, skeletal muscle tissue there. So what do we learn about skeletal muscle? It's voluntary. It's very linear, multinucleated, and usually the nucleus is in the peripheral area. And it's striated, clearly striated. I don't know how to break that down any better. This, my friends, is cardiac muscle. Now, first of all, of course, this is involuntary. By the way, you have to know the function of skeletal muscle, which is to move bones, move joints, movement, generate heat. So now this is just about the heart contracting. The heart contracting, that's all we're doing, and it's a big deal. Man, you need a lot of oxygen, mitochondria, ATP, glucose, insulin, all this stuff for this stuff to move. And calcium, sodium, potassium. You remember all those things from me droning on last time, right? Got to get that stuff down. So now it has nuclei, but it's usually single nuclei, not multinucleated. It has striations, right? It has striations, so it kind of looks like skeletal muscle in that way. But the difference is, on visualizing it, is that cardiac muscle is branched. It's not linear, not in those straight lines like the skeletal muscle was. It's branched, right? Now it has also, and it's branched, you can see like it kind of, this is the outline of it, and you see the white stuff in between. The white stuff is actually nerve tissue called Purkinje. You're going to hear that word later on. Purkinje cells. I'll just call them Purkinje cells or Purkinje fibers. This is nerve tissue. Interspersed in between the branching myocardium, because it has, and myocardium is the same thing as cardiac muscle. Myo means muscle, cardio means heart. So it's very branched. It's involuntary, singly nucleated, sometimes binucleated. It's in the heart. It's for muscle, it's for heart contraction to get blood into circulation, into the arteries. Now here's the hallmark, and this is on every quiz and exam, all the way till you're done with A&P. And these are kind of faint, but here's probably the best one. This is an intercalated disc, or intercalated disc. These little lines here. So they're junctions between muscle cells, and they create a tubular area for ions to flow between gaps between the muscle cells of the heart, cardiac muscle cells. So intercalated discs, and usually they stain a little darker, like if we look close we could see them, but not really. This is not the best histology, but I see it. So you have to look for intercalated discs to know the difference between skeletal and cardiac muscle. And know the function, pumping blood into circulation, involuntary, branching, singular nucleated with these intercalated discs on this cartoon up here. So remember I said before, you got to be careful with this versus dense regular connective tissue. This is smooth muscle now. So please look at the difference between these two. Smooth muscle, it's also called visceral muscle. You can always put muscle like that. And this is non-striated, and it's, let me write that down, non-striated, that's why it's smooth. And it's, of course, involuntary. And it's very important muscle. It's in all your blood vessels. It's in all your digestive tubes. It's in all your tubes, respiratory tubes. Anything that can constrict is using smooth muscle in a tube in the respiratory reproductive. So they use the digestive system, which is true because you have to move the food through, and I'll tell you what that word is. So let's look close. Again, please, whatever you can do to help yourself differentiate smooth muscle histology versus dense regular connective tissue, because it's not easy. And these are muscle nuclei, and smooth muscle is not branched, but they're, let's say this, spindle shaped. No, spindle is like a railing or something. It's always uninuclear. Hope I'm clear about nucleus. That's always that dark staining, DNA containing part organelle within the cell. So it's definitely different, muscle versus nerve tissue, very different. But this muscle kind of crosses over looking like connective tissue. So be careful with this one, please. This is smooth muscle, and it's really important. Smooth muscle is really important because, like Chipotle, right? I have skeletal muscle that, of course, I have to, pick the food up and stick it in my mouth, and I could voluntarily chew it by using muscles of mastication. Mastication means chewing. Grind it down with my teeth and my tongue, move it around. I could swallow the food, and then it goes into the esophagus. Now, once it gets in the esophagus, it doesn't matter if I go outside and hang upside down in a jungle gym. That food, that burrito, is going to go down in my stomach and continue into the small intestine and all the way through, go into the large intestine, and then go across to the descending colon, into the sigmoid colon, into the rectum, and back into the sewer system. So it has to do that through smooth muscle contraction. And that rhythmic contraction, like circular contraction of these muscular walls, especially the digestive system, is called peristalsis. So you're going to get a big smile out of me if it says function of smooth muscle and you put peristalsis or vasoconstriction, which is squeezing blood vessels. You're going to get a nice smile out of me. Vaso is blood vessel. So if you constrict the blood vessel, like arteries that are peripheral in your body, you increase your blood pressure. But I like this one simpler, I think, to remember. Yeah, foodstuffs. And it's not only that, it's also the oocyte moving down the fallopian tube is through peristalsis. Ejaculation of sperms, peristalsis, anything where there's smooth muscle. Smooth and visceral, why we call it visceral is because it's part of the blood vessels, it's part of those organs. Phew, man, crazy stuff, man. So this is like your quiz. I think the quiz I'm going to give you is kind of like this. So go through it. Look at the simple columnar or the pseudostratified columnar ciliated epithelium, all right? Transitional epithelium, stratified squamous epithelium, which we're going to see a lot of in the skin. This is non-keratinized probably. The areolar connective tissue, right? The dense regular connective tissue and so forth. Bone, blood. Smooth muscle, cardiac muscle. Adipose, and skeletal muscle. Yeah. See, look at the intercalated discs. I don't know what to tell you. Tough going, right, Jeremiah?